And peace be with you. Also with you. It's so good to have you here on this beautiful weekend. Lots of rain and I think cars that aren't working and things like that, but we're here. We are here. We are here online. We are here in person. And in today's reading, I just want to point out there's a line I often overlook in the reading what Carla just shared with us from the Gospel of John. And here's the line. Then they gave him dinner. They gave a dinner for him. That's it. The three siblings, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, gave a dinner for Jesus. Now, the times have been tough. Just previously to that, like last month, Lazarus, their brother, Jesus raised from the dead. And then Jesus had to go back to the edges of the wilderness as the authorities in the power center are now plotting openly, how do we get rid of this Jesus? And everyone can see how Jesus can no longer walk around openly. Everyone can see how it's going to end. It's going to be a showdown. There's going to be a confrontation in the big city. And the circle is growing tighter. And everyone knows how it ended with the prophets. What happened to the prophets often? They were killed. How did it end with John the Baptist? He was killed. How is it going to end with Jesus? Killed. Go against the powers that be, that's the risk you run. So a messenger from God calls out the corrupt actions of the super powerful and the super wealthy. This messenger stands up for orphans and widows, defends the people who are scapegoated, and then they are killed by the authorities. Even though the messenger is calling people to return to God's ways of justice and love. And so for Jesus and his group, this is a fraught time, a very fraught time. This is a critical part of this resistance against greed and corruption in high places. It's a very fraught time. How does Jesus resist during this all-important critical time? Here's how he resists, at least in part. He goes to the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and there they give a dinner for him. So instead of being overcome with doom, instead of panicking, he goes to the home of friends, and instead of, for dinner. So I have to say today in April 2025, we can find it easy to be overcome with dreadful news, turning on the news anywhere. News from ball games being rained out to news far worse than that. And many of us, myself also, are doom scrolling. Have you heard that, Tia? Doom scrolling. Continuously consuming news, often negative news. We scroll through distressing stories, social media feeds. There's lots of negative content to choose from these days, and you can choose it in many different flavors. Doom surfing. But Jesus, in this moment, is choosing the opposite of doom scrolling. He chooses the joy of food with family and friends. In the face of scary news, Jesus chooses the joy of that. And this joy, in this text, I'll unpack it a little bit. This joy is an act of resistance. It's an act of resistance. When the corrupt in power want to dominate and crush you, joy is an act of resistance. And I look back and I think, well, what were some of the dishes they shared at this dinner time? What brought them joy? Because I think food can bring me joy. I don't know if food can bring you joy too, food with friends. I think of favorite foods that make me deeply glad, or comfort foods. One comfort food I have is petahat. vareniki. Polish call it pierogies. I can remember my grandmother in her kitchen filled with aunts and cousins and lots of people in a big assembly line, and they're making hundreds and hundreds of these dumplings, and they're talking. I can't understand a lot of the talk, it's in Ukrainian, and they're making all these dumplings and put it on, and they're just having a great time, and then we have a feast afterwards. They store some and take it to other homes. It's a lot of work to make hundreds and hundreds of dumplings stuffed with potatoes, sauerkraut, meat, cheese, or different variations. And the way you knew, if you were in the know, the way you knew which was they would do different thumb twists as they would close the petahas. Oh yeah, that's the cheese dumpling. Oh no, this is all sauerkraut. And of course you have it all slathered in butter and onions and garlic. So that, I'm getting very hungry right now. And it's, when I can sit down to a feast of petaha, I'm sitting down to a feast of joy. You know, I know that family and friends will be there too, and it's going to be a great time. And my mom has made lots of petaha for us at occasions in the past. I have tried to make it sometimes and utterly failed, but it's a comfort food. It's a comfort food. It's wonderful. And I don't know what comfort foods you have. Do you have petaha? Is that a food for you? What's a comfort food?
Biscuits.
Biscuits? Biscuits?
I
Okay.
love ice cream.
Ice cream. Ice cream. Okay. Ice cream. Biscuits. What else? What else?
Corn pudding.
Corn pudding. Wow. Corn pudding. Yummy. And any other comfort foods here?
Mac and cheese.
Mac and cheese. Mac and cheese. So, and dumplings. So imagine your comfort food just sitting down, and it's fun, right? It's joyful. I see you're smiling with all this great food. And so I have to say my daughter Becca sometimes makes another type of food that my mother and grandmother have also made, a holche. Holche, it's a stuffed cabbage leaves, which is delicious. And again, if someone takes the time to do that and prepares it, you're going to have a great time at dinner. It's going to be a great dinner. And on my dad's side, the Norwegian side of the family, we would make lefse. I've shared that with some of you, the Norwegian flat pancakes. And at the Weefald family reunions in North Dakota and Minnesota, we would have different family groups making different varieties of lefse. And it would just be a fun time, just a lot of fun. And so sharing favorite foods with family, this joy of eating, it's a joy. I remember who I am, and these foods that have been so important maybe to our immediate family, or maybe going back to some of our ancestors. I remember where I come from in this moment of joy. And this joy, especially in troubled times, is an act of resistance. You're going to have joy. This is who you are. This is the family or the friends that God has given you, and Jesus came that our joy may be complete, despite whatever else is happening. That's what Passover is, and that is, in our reading read for us for Carla, that's what's coming up as Jesus is sitting down for dinner with his dear friends. Passover, remembering that the people of God escaped from slavery in Egypt, came to freedom in the promised land. That's what Holy Communion is. We remember we are the people of God as we're fed at this feast today. Maybe not as tasty as mac and cheese and ice cream, but this is the feast where we remember that we are following the ways of Jesus. We remember whose we are. We belong to God in this joyful feast. Now, during this meal with Jesus, there is another act of resistance. First of all, just to sit down and have fun, that's your first act of resistance. The second act that takes place is Mary anointing Jesus with very expensive perfume. This is incredibly costly oil. It's reserved for the anointing of kings, and Mary deliberately anoints Jesus in the face of the crackdown against Jesus. So the authorities are trying to kill him. She anoints him with the oil reserved for kings. And the second fold meaning is that she is anointing him for his end. Everyone knows how it's going to end. He's going to die by standing up in the line of the prophets, by standing up and opposing forces. He opposes it with love, by resisting with justice. They know how it's going to end. And so she's preparing him for death also. And again, with the oil and the smell of the oil that's reserved only for the royalty, only for the most powerful. These are flagrant acts of resistance on Mary's part. These are courageous acts of resistance. Mary is maintaining that despite everything that's happening, and Jesus not having an army, that he is the real king. He is the real president. He is the real prime minister for them and for their lives. And at this pivotal moment of dinner, just after Mary anoints Jesus, there's pushback from Judas, who will later go on to betray Jesus. And when Judas attacks this use of expensive perfume and rightly points out that many poor people could have been helped by it, Jesus says something very odd. And this comes across in our translations. He says, "You will always have the poor with you, but you won't always have me." Isn't that kind of odd that Jesus would say that? It sounds uncaring, like out of character. He sounds like some out-of-touch trillionaire. Oh, you're always going to have the poor. Don't worry about them. Now you have me. But I have to tell you that scholarship, translations make all the difference in the world. And each generation is called anew to translate words into our own language here. For example, we are not talking and reading in common Greek this morning, in Koine 2,000-year-old Greek, because it has to be translated. And language keeps changing. And so an important thing for you to know is what Professor Lindsay Jodry of Princeton Theological Seminary has helped us to unpack this text a little bit more. There's an ancient Greek word. I have to teach you a little bit Greek. Okay, there's an ancient Greek word in question is ekate. It's eta, kai, eta, tau, eta. Trust me. Ekate. So what's important to know is that this particular word is spelled the same way for two different tenses. And the two tenses are indicative and imperative. We're doing a little grammar here. If you're studying for the SAT, this is a great day to be here. Okay, so the indicative and the imperative. The indicative is an ongoing condition. It's continuing. You will always have the poor with you. However, that same spelling is also imperative. It's a command. Keep the poor with you always. Same spelling, same words in the Bible. None of the letters are changing. How you translate makes all the difference. You will always have the poor with you. Keep the poor with you always. Very different meanings. Jesus is saying, keep the poor with you always. The forces against me want you to abandon the poor. They want to push the poor aside and build bigger piles of wealth in Jerusalem and power for themselves. But you, my disciples, here in the meal I'm sharing now with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and all the disciples here, Judas, and all the rest of them, you'll be the ones to keep the poor with you always. That's who you are. You are the people who keep the poor with you always, and your walking with the poor is an act of resistance against the powers that be. On December 4th, 1967, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. announced plans for a Poor People's Campaign. Poor People's Campaign. And called for the nation to take dramatic steps to end poverty. And despite his assassination, this effort went forward, but it was cut short at that time. In the last few years, this Poor People's Campaign has been revived, led by people by Bishop Barber and many others. You see, because at the time, King, a pastor following in the ways of Jesus, he aligned himself with the struggle of poor sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. And he suggested that their struggle for dignity was a dramatization of the issues taken up by the Poor People's Campaign, a fight by capable, hard workers against discrimination. Their wages were kept artificially low so the owners of the businesses can make more money instead of letting these people earn a decent living, a living wage, and have a decent place to live. And it was fighting against, Martin Luther King pointed out, against the richest country in the world in 1967. The Poor People's Campaign, not just with Bishop Barber, but it's being revived whenever we as disciples of Jesus, when we're walking with the poor, keep the poor among you always. Have the right relationship with God, with love, with justice, and that's having the right relationship with the poor. It's being revived when we feed the poor in Cambridge and Waltham, when we collect clothing and sort it at Cradles to Cran for families that are in poverty, below the poverty line. When we bring in amazing people like Sandy with Kisoboka of Uganda, when we present the Christmas play, and we have a meal with people from Common Cathedral who are in partnership with the unhoused and homeless, and we give all the proceedings to them. When we are following the words of resistance, the words of Jesus, keep the poor among you always. Don't push them aside. Keep them with you. Keep them with you. And if we could do that, and if we could call ourselves to do that, and remind ourselves this is what we are called to do, then we're letting ourselves be shaped by these actions of love and justice, instead of being shaped by actions of gluttony and power. This weekend, there are thousands and thousands of people protesting against the current powers in the United States. The truth is that God is always calling us to be in opposition. Always, always. Regimes come and go. Political parties come and go. But we, the people of God, are forever called to be in opposition, to oppose acts of cruelty. We're always called to be in opposition, opposed to a way that greed can amass great wealth at the expense of so many others on the margins of society. We are always called to resistance, to resist those who would economically enslave so many people just so they can have so much more. We are always called to advocate for those at the margins of society. We, the people of God, strengthening each other today in story and song and prayer, we are forever called, eternally called, to stand in line with the prophets, to kneel with Mary anointing Jesus, an act of resistance against a leadership that has gone astray, to walk with Jesus, keeping the poor with us always, always, to sit down at the feast with our friends, maybe mac and cheese, maybe Petaha, our family, our close ones, our God, choosing resistance by choosing joy, by choosing joy. Always, always, always. Thanks be to God.